The year is 2013. Obama is sworn in for his second term in office. China unravels Chang'e 3, becoming the first spaceship to land on the moon in any capacity since 1976. A meteor explodes in Russia, injuring over 1,000 people and raising concerns about the dangers of actual meteor showers. In theaters, films like Frozen, The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Iron Man 3 storm the multiplexes. Waiting in the backdrop, though, are two films that are looking to lay siege to the independence of America's capital. Only one will come out on top and spawn a franchise in the process. It's Olympus Has Fallen versus White House Down. Hey everyone, before we get this exploration of film history started, I'd like you to remember to subscribe, share, and hit that like button. Also, check out my website at dansden.net. Anyway, see you on the other side. Cretan Rothenberger was a native of Boyertown, Pennsylvania. He attended the University of Philadelphia in 2000. Initially, Rothenberger had set his sights on working the corporate ladder, but had started to take screenwriting classes at night and began to fall in love with the art form. In 2002, he won the Academy Nicole Friendship for his work on a Korean war epic titled The Chosen. It was during one of these script meetings when he met Katrin Benedict. Benedict, an Iceland immigrant, came to the U.S. at the age of 6. She had gone to college with similar business interests, but just like Rothenberger, she had started to become more and more drawn to the idea of becoming a scriptwriter instead. Given Rothenberger and Benedict's backgrounds, it might not come as a surprise that the two immediately hit off. They got married in 2006, and with Rothenberger's Academy Fellowship to his name, the duo decided to move to Los Angeles full-time to pursue their dreams. But what seemed promising at first, instead turned rather gloomy, as reality peeked its head through. While in LA, they were barely making a living, struggling to get scripts off the ground. They had an agent, but according to Rothenberger, they had written 20 different spec scripts, and all of them had been rejected. One of these was a spec script that was rattling around Rothenberger's mind. It began with a scenario. What would be the most impossible building to take over in the world? The answer to him seemed glaringly obvious: the White House. Rothenberger based this off an image he had of Secret Service agents fighting villains near the staircase of the White House. It was decided that the main character should be a disgraced Secret Service agent who is called back into action once again to protect the president and his country. The two would take influence from movies like In the Line of Fire and To Live and Die in LA, among others. The concept sounded lucrative and promising. However, again, it didn't seem to go anywhere. It wasn't until the duo landed a contract at Gersh and got agents through Deborah Lieb and Alex Lerner at Kaplan Perone did things start to pick up. Lerner looked through their body of work and decided that the screenplay they had written, titled Olympus Has Fallen, would be the first to get the film treatment. Before the script could be sent in to potentially be acquired by a studio, though, Lerner suggested a few revisions to the initial draft to make the story more of a coherent whole. Entire plots, twists, and characters had to be altered or removed entirely. The original script had government elements from the 2000s. Those were revised. It also had more overtly political dialogue, which, according to Rothenberger and Benedict, dragged down the pace of the film considerably. The changes had been applied, and the shooting script was set in. Millennium Films immediately scooped up the rights in March of 2012, and production was looking to get underway. Millennium Films, or as it's now known as Millennium Media, was a company founded in 1992. The studio is most known for their catalog of action films, which, if you scroll down their filmography, you'll find a lot of them are very B-movie-ish or straight-to-video in nature. Classics like Cyborg Cop, Shark Attack, and a number of those later-day terrible Steven Seagal straight-to-video drex. Beginning in the mid-2000s, the company started to set its sights on more ambitious, theatrical release films with larger budgets and more recognizable stars. Olympus Has Fallen was by no means Millennium's first real stab at a high-profile, wide-release film, but with an ambitious concept and potentially higher budget, it was not going to be chump change either. To ensure the movie's potential financial stability, a recognizable star would need to play the lead role. Gerard Butler would sign on the lead role of Secret Service agent Mike Banning. Butler had built a reputation in the industry following his breakthrough in 2006's 300 for playing tough as nails, traditional old-school R-rated action leads. What attracted Butler to Olympus Has Fallen was what attracted him to a good majority of the action films he starred in. He was playing a tough man in over his head, who is brutal and is willing to break the rules to go about as far as he can. But Butler also liked that the movie scenario presented the opportunity for a potentially unshakable, terrifying portrayal of terrorism. He would serve as a producer on the film and be responsible for reshaping elements of the script pertaining to his character. To prepare for his part as Banning, Butler trained with real Navy SEALs, SWAT team members, and stuntmen, not just so he could get into perfect physical shape, but also to play on his character's athletic, almost martial arts type skills. He would also consult with real Secret Service agents in order to learn how to act appropriately emotional towards the film's enemies. Antoine Fuqua previously worked with Millennium on Brooklyn's Finest, would be hired to step behind the camera. Fuqua started his career out shooting music videos, his most famous being Coolio's Gangster Paradise. His particular eye made him perfect to helm action or action-like films that critics were generally mixed on, but tend to be reasonably popular. When Fuqua was making Olympus Has Fallen, the director was in a bit of a stagnant period, while he had projects lined up in the interim, including an Eminem boxing movie, which eventually evolved into Southpaw with Jake Gyllenhaal, and a Tupac Shakur biopic. None of them appeared to be getting off the ground. He got a call from Gerard Butler. Butler, who tried to work with Fuqua before, thought that Olympus would be perfect for the two. Fuqua agreed. He needed the work, and the script appealed to him. Fuqua had made movies before that dealt with heavy gunplay and Navy SEAL type operations, and he liked the film presenting a down and dirty hero's journey of sorts. But what drew him to the picture the most was the idea of presenting terrorism on screen in a realistic and gritty fashion. He wanted the film to be entertaining, to make audiences laugh and cry, but he also wanted to make them feel patriotic in a way, that they should come out of their screenings and think, could that actually happen? Could there literally be an attempted siege in the Capitol? And what can we do, if anything, to stop it? Fuqua had a tight schedule, 6 weeks of preparation, and an accelerated post-production. He worked with a team of unnamed consultants, including the aforementioned Secret Service agents and action choreographer Keith Willard, to make the movie work about as well as it could, within the confines of an extreme action narrative. One of Fuqua's script suggestions was to change the date of the film's location from July 4th to July 5th. He felt that it would make more sense if terrorists were attacking Washington during a post-holiday hangover, because security is less likely to be potentially on high alert. The supporting cast will be filled out by very recognizable names. Aaron Eckhart is the film's kidnapped President Benjamin Asher. Eckhart based his performance on JFK and researched what attributes he thought made for an ideal film president. Words like integrity, honesty, trustworthy, and courageousness kept creeping through his mind. He got into physical shape to counterbalance Gerard Butler's athleticism, and the two would train together during the boxing scene at the beginning. Morgan Freeman as the Speaker of the House. Freeman admitted he did the film for money, but he would entertain the cast and crew on set by performing jazz standards. Ashley Judd is the tragic First Lady. Angela Bassett is the director of the Secret Service. Bassett's part was originally written for a man, but when Bassett expressed interest in the film, wanting to work with Morgan Freeman, it was rewritten to be a female at the behest of Fuqua. Radha Mitchell is Mike's wife Leah. Dylan McDermott is Dave Forbes, a former treacherous United States Secret Service agent. McDermott ad-libbed Forbes' speech about globalization on set, and Fuqua decided to include it in the film. Robert Forster as General Clegg, Cole Hauser as Agent Roma, Rick Yune as Kane Yusak, the film's main antagonist, a North Korean ultranationalist, and Melissa Leo as the Secretary of Defense. For her more physical scenes, Leo would do step-ups on an apple box to keep her heart rate going in between takes. She would also wear a brown wig, as she was shooting Trim around the same time.
Could be worse. How's my hair?
Not a strand out of place.
Perhaps the reason that Millennium Films was so quick to greenlight Olympus Has Fallen, though, was because as the cameras were rolling, another White House set action movie was already in the stages of development. Though neither film Olympus or his other action movie titled White House Down was directly inspired by the other, what was clear was that the war for the White House movie had already begun. James Vanderbilt was born on November 17, 1975. A member of the affluent, famous Vanderbilt family, James was raised in Norwalk, Connecticut. As a young man, in order to advance his burgeoning interest in becoming a screenwriter, Vanderbilt attended the University of Southern California. 2 days before graduating college, Vanderbilt sold his first spec script. a comedy titled Independence, Mississippi. Though it never got made into a feature, it would be an important stepping stone in getting his career through the door. In 2003, Vanderbilt would make his feature film breakthrough with 3 wide theatrically released films: Darkness Falls, Basic, and The Rundown. It was during the second of those films, Basic, where Vanderbilt would start to form the backbones of a story involving the attempted kidnapping of the president. It was built on Vanderbilt's own interest in political type stories. He was fascinated with the concept of what America does in a time of crisis. What are the plans? What are the physical steps? Can you deploy troops on American soil? All these ideas were swimming around his head. Vanderbilt had been hired to adapt Richard A. Clarke's political memoir, Against All Enemies, into a feature film. Against All Enemies was based on Clarke's candidate experiences in both the Clinton and W administrations as a national coordinator for security. It touched on subjects like his involvement in the war on terrorism and his role in 9/11. For one reason or another, though, the project never got past the initial writing stages. Vanderbilt would then be hired to adapt Robert Graysmith's non-fiction novels Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked for director David Fincher. Fincher's Zodiac is rightfully regarded as a masterpiece by some, but for Vanderbilt, the experience of having to write 2 dramatic, real-life stories back-to-back left him feeling tired. He decided that his next film, an original screenplay that dealt with potentially heavy subject matter, should be approached in more of a lighthearted, action-packed, humorous way, in the vein of films like Die Hard and Executive Decision. Being a relatively recent father of 2, he would place the emotional core of the story on the relationship between the movie's main character and his estranged daughter. Vanderbilt had formed his own production company, Mythology Entertainment, with his producing partner Bradley J. Fisher and Lathy Kalagrissis. They sent out the initial spec script titled White House Down. It caught the immediate attention of Sony chairman head Amy Pascal. Pascal read the script, thought it had potential, and decided to scoop up the rights for a healthy record-breaking sum of $3 million. For the film's director, Pascal hadn't even gotten about halfway through the screenplay before she decided she knew it would be perfect. As written, White House Down was going to be quite expensive, with massive set pieces. To Pascal, who better to convey this than everybody's favorite disaster artist, Roland Emmerich. Emmerich was coming off trying to crack the script for a movie he was working on called Singularity. Singularity was a sci-fi thriller that told the story of a young man who developed superpowers via nanobot experimentation. It was estimated to cost about $175 million, but the project as it was being developed wasn't working, and Emmerich knew it. Emmerich had built a career off making critically trashed but huge money-making spectacles with big visual effects and set pieces. 3 of his features beforehand, his so-called disaster trilogy, Independence Day, The Day After Tomorrow, and 2012, all featured the president in some capacity. White House Down would fit right into Roland's wheelhouse. But White House Down was a movie that was entirely centered around the president, which meant that Emmerich had to go one step beyond. He had to depict the commander-in-chief on screen in a way he hadn't before. He couldn't merely be an inspiring, important figure with potential complications on the side. He had to be a well-developed, well-rounded person. Emmerich had a history of co-writing the majority of his films. Thus, he had 2 suggestions for Vanderbilt. One of these was to make the audiences more sympathetic to President Sawyer's plight. The other was to develop the motivations of the main antagonists further. In the original script, it was established that they were just in it for the money. As this was Emmerich's first real traditional action movie since Universal Soldier, he had to do a lot more elaborate camera work. He took influence from Die Hard, obviously, Channing Tatum's t-shirt being an intentional nod to John McClane and Tony Scott films, particularly Man on Fire, when it came to his approach of balancing action with more sincere moments. The scene where the White House tour guide makes reference to the movie Independence Day was not in the original script. Instead, it was ad-libbed by the actor Nicholas Wright on set. Emmerich found the line amusing, so he decided to include it in the film. With Emmerich confirmed to be behind the camera, the film was on track to happen, but the estimated budget was going to be pricey, well over $100 million. Because of this, Sony would need a relatively hot young leading man in the main role, somebody who had charm and could play comedy really well. Pascal got on the phone and called Reed Carolyn, Channing Tatum's producing partner, to ask if the actor was interested in working with Roland Emmerich. Tatum would meet with Emmerich for coffee at 7 in the morning, and the two got to know each other. Tatum would then agree to play the lead in White House Down. When Channing Tatum signed on to play the lead in White House Down, the actor was coming off what might be described as a super hot year in 2012. He had starred in three $100 million domestic grossers in The Vow, 21 Jump Street, and Magic Mike. Theoretically, it wasn't hard to imagine White House Down joining the ranks of his then current strong batting average. According to Tatum, he was initially reluctant to approach the project because he didn't want to box himself in as the gun-tooting action hero. Then he read the script and he was immediately attracted to the concept. As somebody who always wanted to be a dad, his first child would be born the same year White House Down was released. He particularly loved the father-daughter angle to his character. To prepare for his part, Tatum trained with Navy SEAL agents. In the process, he learned how to use weapons that he'd never attempted to carry on screen before, like miniguns and grenades. After Channing signed on, Sony pushed the release date of the film from November of 2012 to June 28th of 2013, a week before July, likely an attempt to play out the patriotic presidential aspect. Rounding out the film's buddy duo would be Jamie Foxx as President James Sawyer. When Emmerich went to Louisiana to meet Foxx for the part, it was the first time the director had learned of the existence of another White House action movie. Foxx, who was coming off last year's Django Unchained, was perfect to portray the film's fictitious president. In press junkets while promoting the film, Foxx was quick to point out that while Sawyer was clearly written to be an Obama stand-in, he wasn't doing a straightforward impression of the then current famed man in charge. Instead, Foxx applied his own tics as a performer and merged it with what was written on the page, creating a wholly original character in the process. He took particular influence from Harrison Ford's turn as an action president in Air Force One. The rest of the cast would include Maggie Gyllenhaal as a Secret Service agent. Gyllenhaal brought her newborn daughter on set and called the experience a great gig with a tiny baby. There was a very large trailer. Joey King is Emily, Cale's daughter. King had nothing but glowing things to say about Tatum, describing him as being parental on set. Richard Jenkins as the Speaker of the House. The late Lance Reddick as General Caulfield. Our villains would include the perfectly cast James Woods as Martin Walker, the retiring Secret Service presidential special agent in charge, seeking revenge for the death of his son, and Jason Clarke as Emil Stentz, a renegade ex-Delta Force and CIA operative who holds a personal grudge against Cale. Production for Olympus Has Fallen began in Shreveport, Louisiana in July of 2012. Initially, the movie was set to film in September, but as Millennium didn't want to directly compete with White House Down, they decided to schedule the production 4 months earlier. Fuqua would use regular and digital cameras. The biggest issue on set would come from having to film in Shreveport. It was a particularly hot summer season in the city, with temperatures ranging from about 115 to 120 degrees. Several cast and crew members would pass out from exhaustion. Gerard Butler was sweating so much that Fuqua noted that it looked like he had taken a shower, fully clothed. As the actors did a lot of the action on camera and on location, this led to the usual on-set injuries. Gerard Butler, being the main star, naturally had it the worst. Butler's commitment to wanting to do a lot of his own stunts resulted in the actor getting a black bruise around his arm, a bruise on the back of his leg, and he'd be hit in the eye by a bullet case that bounced off the wall. During the sequence where Dylan McDermott's Forbes flicks a cigarette at Gerard Butler's banning, the cigarette they used was so real, it stuck to Butler's glycerin heavy neck, resulting in the actor getting a scab. This was reverberated in the scene where Butler narrowly avoids chopping McDermott's Forbes. The blow was hard enough that it resulted in McDermott having to be sent to the hospital. Fuqua would intentionally implement a semi-method environment on set. Not get hired by his approach in Rick Yoon, playing North Korean terrorist, meant the actors would pretend that they didn't want anything to do with him. One day he came up to director Antoine Fuqua and said, "Nobody likes me here." Fuqua responded by saying, "Rick, you're the terrorist. It's not always fun to be in that environment." Yoon had nothing but praiseworthy things to say about Fuqua throughout the shoot. To remove unconvincing, unrealistic film strategies, Fuqua and the rest of the crew would consult with Daryl Connerton, a member of the Department of Defense. Connerton intentionally made the strategies correct and incorrect at the same time, in hopes that the crew wouldn't go overboard. He would also be given a small part in the film as a CIA director. As Olympus Has Fallen was made on a relatively tight budget of about $70 million, this meant that the crew could not actually afford to film any sequences in Washington, D.C. Instead, the famed American landmark had to be recreated via visual effects, with a replica built on location in Shreveport. Production designer Derek R. Hill and his team would be tasked with recreating the north lawn of the White House, including the low portion of the main house, the circular drive, guard shack, and fence. They researched books to get the general gist of what the building would look like. The rest, an estimated 60 to 70%, would be done up in computers. The visual effects for Olympus Has Fallen would be handled by Worldwide FX offices in Sofia, Bulgaria, and Shreveport, Louisiana, Base FX in China, and Ghost FX in Denmark, led by effects supervisor Evan Jacobs. The various teams had a tight post-production schedule with 4.5 months to deliver results in time for the film's planned release. To accomplish the scene where the White House gets attacked by the C-130 vehicle, the crews at Worldwide FX and Base FX had to first build the north side of the White House, containing the portico, stairs, driveway, the fountain, and the fence. The location they were shooting in lacked trees and surrounding buildings. Those had to be added in post. The most difficult challenge for the teams would be to recreate the air vehicles that are featured in the film, since those are impossible to obtain. Instead, the crew would have to rely on stills and references that were taken directly from the White House. For the cockpit motion bases, they filmed those sequences on green screen stages and changed things up in post. For the film's big, explosive White House crash sequences, the FX were handled primarily by the visual artists at Worldwide FX offices. Worldwide used a combination of digital extensions, explosions, CGI buildings, RPGs, smoke, and inserted extras via computers to fill up the cast of numerous attacking terrorists. This sequence was not made using green screens, so instead, the crew had to rely on roto to accomplish their task. Most of the Black Hawk assault sequence would be done with CG helicopters using various light sources, and filmed cockpit shots on a motion base. According to Evan Jacobs, this was to play up the stealth factor. Jacobs estimated that by the end, that the visual effects companies who worked on the feature did about 1,800 shots. Of those 1,800 shots, about 1,300 of them ended up in the final product. Rounding out the production team would include cinematographer Conrad W. Hall, son of the late well-regarded Conrad L. Hall, composer Trevor Morris, who said he was attracted to the project because he wanted to work with Antoine Fuqua, art director Karen Stewart, and costume designer Doug Hall. Filming wrapped for Olympus Has Fallen on September 15th, 2012. For a movie of this relative scale and budget, owing to the pressures of Millennium, the production went relatively fast. Fuqua was about as much of a professional as you could have hoped for, with cast and crew members praising him equally. The final cut for the film would be 1 hour and 59 minutes, just shy of 2. Fuqua and the late editor John Raffia would trim over 30 minutes from the initial 2.5 hour working cut. White House Down ran into a lot of similar problems, but as the film was being positioned as a summer blockbuster with Roland Emmerich behind the camera, the filmmakers were permitted far more money and resources. The majority of the movie would be filmed in La Cité du Cinema in Quebec, Canada. Aerial plane and helicopter shots would be done up in DC, with production set to start in September of 2012. Before the cameras could start rolling properly, the crew ran into a major shooting problem. Channing Tatum was scheduled to film Foxcatcher that following October. The crew, including director Roland Emmerich, had to push production up a month to accompany his schedule. Emmerich shot the majority of the movie on sound stages and on blue screens, using digital cameras and wide-angle lenses, meant to showcase the film's big scope. IMAX cameras would also be applied for certain scenes, using the 48 FPS or 48 frames per second format. All of this was done so Emmerich could have complete control over the exteriors on set. Tatum did a lot of his own stunts, resulting in the usual on-set bruises and wounds. For the most part, he was relatively unscathed, as far as major injuries go, but he did suffer a fall that left him with a hurt butt. James Woods would also get hit in the eye with a blank cartridge. He would be slightly injured, but it wasn't that serious or anything. During the film's big car chase, the rocket launcher they were using was accidentally fired directly at Jamie Foxx. It wasn't real, so nobody actually got hurt, and Tatum and Fox would have a good laugh about the experience. Owing to Tatum's schedule, the production crew consisting of 32 set designers, 200-300 tradesmen, and night workers would have 2.5 months to build sets. In total, 45 sets would be constructed, including most of the White House, the Pentagon, the Capitol, the tanks. The Oval Office would also have 2 sets, one for stunts and one for dialogue. Emmerich and production designer Kirk Petticelli would take several tours of the Pentagon and the state capitol, under the supervision of Senator John McCain. They read books, researched the history of the building, learning things from where the passageways lay to how much the place had changed, and its then 220 years of history. It was estimated that by the end of the shoot, the production team had managed to recreate about 65% of the White House. One prominently featured area in the film that the crew would be forbidden from visiting would be the President's Emergency Operations Center. Petticelli and his team would be forced to recreate the area based on their own assumptions, creating a room out of concrete, steel, and glass in the process, which would then make way for an octagonal structure. When designing the weapons of the film, the crew had an unnamed consultant on board. The consultant would alert them if the weapons they were creating were too close to the actual Secret Service tools in real life. This was out of fear of the weapons, if done too well, might fall into the wrong hands. Graham Kelly, the film's action vehicle supervisor, would be tasked with recreating the Beast, the official state car of the president. As the president and his associated circle wasn't willing to provide info on the car, Kelly and his team would base their design on the headlight of a Cadillac Escalade. They would use this to measure the dimension of the car's size, and then a team of sculptors would be responsible for the top. Kelly would get his information firsthand on the design from a person he knew who knew somebody who worked in the White House garage. In total, 3 cars would be built. Kelly jokingly thought it was surprising that he wasn't arrested for outright theft, given how much the final design resembled that of the actual presidential car. The crew was not allowed to directly use the presidential seal. Because of this, the version they used in the film had to be slightly modified for it to be considered legal. The special effects for White House Down would be handled by a hodgepodge of companies: Method Studios, Prime Focus World, Hybrid Technologies, Lux Studios, Imagine Engine Design, and Scanline VFX. Additional visual effects would be provided by Crazy Horse Effects, Trickster, Crafty Apes, Factory VFX, Fuse FX, and Bot VFX, among others. Under the supervision of special effects supervisors Mark Weiger and Volker Engel, the visuals would largely be digital, taken from actual footage, and done up in computers. Emmerich assumed that there would at least be a few hundred visual effects shots required. However, recreating the set of the White House on such a large scale and scope does not come cheap. In actuality, the production would require more than double that. Method Studios and Hybrid, a division of Activision, would be tasked with handling most of the film's more complex and realistic FX shots. Method would be responsible for the White House, the grounds, the East Wing, the West Wing, the Capitals. They would also work on vital scenes, like the one where the helicopters get shot and the burning of the White House. This sequence ran into many problems, but the biggest challenge would come from having to recreate and simulate the movement of mock trees, due to the space and number of shots that would be required. To get around this, the team created an animation rig to simulate the perfect outside digital environment, consisting of computer-generated leaves, blades of grass, grit, dust, and a turbine wind effect. Hybrid's contribution to this sequence would be the beginning when the helicopters first arrive. They use a combination of digital tools and deep image compositing techniques. Image Engine would contribute to the aerial view of the White House during the sequence where it's on fire, shots of people running away from the attack, and sequences of cars being stuck in traffic jams. Scanline work on splashes and be responsible for the Air Force One getting destroyed. Lux would do the majority of the opening sequence, while Crazy Horse's contribution would be the initial close-up shot of the White House in full. Prime Focus would also be responsible for creating the chase around the White House, with the Beast and the Raptor jet bomb attack at the end. Cinematographer Anna Forster would use Arri Alexa digital cameras intended to create a contrast between bright and dark. As this was her first real blockbuster motion picture, she and her team would be tasked with the challenge of having to create realistic light exteriors on giant sets on sound stages. The cinematography crew would film a lot of the shots off stage, near a golf range in Montreal called the UFO. The rest of the crew would consist of Roland Emmerich regulars. Emmerich's producing partner and co-composer Harold Closer would do the score alongside Thomas Wander. The art direction would be handled by a team led by David Gosher. Lizzie Crystal, who received an Oscar nomination for her work on Emmerich's Anonymous, would be responsible for the costumes, while the makeup team would be led by Thomas Nellen. Production for White House Down would wrap in December of 2012, with post-production work immediately following. The cast and crew seemed to get along fine. Emmerich pushed for the actors to do jokes on set to liven the environment, and Channing Tatum expressed interest in working with the director again. The initial working cut for the film was estimated to be about 2.5 hours. Emmerich and editor Adam Wolf worked together to reshape the film, cutting out scenes that didn't contribute to the overall flow of the plot. By the end of post-production, the film would be released with a runtime of 2 hours and 11 minutes, including credits. Both films, Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down, had finally completed production. It was now time to see which of these action pictures would wind up on top, in what was being dubbed by some of the media as the White House thriller race. Film District immediately picked up the rights to distribute Olympus Has Fallen theatrically. The initial release date for the film would be April 2013, but it was pushed back a month earlier to March. To skeptics and prognosticators, this was seen as a clear attempt to distance the film from White House Down, which was still scheduled for a summer release. After much speculation, Olympus Has Fallen's first poster arrived on November 9, 2012. The initial teaser poster, while not exactly my cup of tea, did a great job of selling the film on exactly what it was, a movie about the White House being under attack. Although the poster is weird, because the three leads that the marketing would build itself on, Gerard Butler, Aaron Eckhart, and Morgan Freeman, aren't even listed name-wise. I guess the guy doing the bottom text then was having an off day. The official trailer for Olympus Has Fallen dropped on January 2nd, 2013, exactly 2 months before the film's intended release. The trailer was straightforward, selling the premise well. It opens with the first few scenes of the film to lull the audiences into a false sense of security, before going fast-paced with the editing. It zips right through its concept, establishing the premise of a fallen Secret Service agent who is alone in his quest to save his country from an attack. The movie trailer was considered quite effective. It was clear it knew what it wanted to be, a serious action movie in the vein of Die Hard. The marketing for Olympus Has Fallen was very male-centric. Film District did spots on channels like Spike, History, ESPN, Discovery, during AMC's The Walking Dead, NCAA's tournament coverage, and Fox's Sunday block, Animation Domination. Gerard Butler and Aaron Eckhart would also do 3 short comical promos for Comedy Central.
So who would you take a bullet for? Justin Bieber. Bieber, huh? I love him. Me too.
And the cast would do the typical press tour and late-night talk show circuit. But Film District also decided to do something a bit whole unique at the time. They would use Twitter's now-defunct hosting service Vine as a way to promote Olympus. Film District would share brief footage from test screenings in hopes that it would generate larger buzz. Film District would also launch an Olympus Has Fallen website. The website existed as another way for people to view the trailer, but also to watch interviews with the cast and read bios. It played out like an initiative for the Secret Service, complete with questions like, if terrorists attacked, would you fight for your country? It had categories like classified intel and the White House. On March 13th, a screening for Olympus Has Fallen was held at the Tribeca Grand Hotel screening room in New York City. The response to the film was unanimously positive. When the credits rolled, the audience cheered. The movie was given the 2-day obligatory screenings in Washington. Secret Service members, journalists, politicians, ambassadors all got to see it before its general release. Gerard Butler and company were nervous about their response. During the sequence in which the White House is attacked, Gerard Butler sank in his seat and thought to himself, oh God, but much to their expected chagrin and delight. By all accounts, the screening went through the roof. They loved the movie. According to Butler, he was at a foundation with Bill Clinton. When Clinton introduced Butler, he pointed right at him, saying, listen, this man saved our country. He is a true hero. Butler was satisfied by that response. Reviews for Olympus Has Fallen were mixed to say the least. Some critics praised the movie for being a well-staged action throwback. Liam Lacey of the Globe and Mail gave Olympus a positive review, calling it a retro thriller with plenty of guilty pleasures. While Bill Zwecker, writing for Roger Ebert's site, awarded the movie 3 stars, writing that it was a well-crafted thriller with a nice twist on a well-worn formula. He praised Butler's performance in particular. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had David Edelstein of Vulture saying, Olympus Has Fallen is a disgusting piece of work, but it certainly hits the mark. It makes you sick with suspense. Joe Morgenstern of the Wall Street Journal, Olympus Has Fallen is no fun at all. To the contrary, it soon grows tedious, odious, and oppressive. A.O. Scott of the New York Times, it may be too much to ask for anything more, but on the other hand, if you're going to go to the trouble of pretending to blow up the White House, you might also want to pretend that something was at stake. And perhaps the most brutal of the pans, Scott Tobias of the AV Club wrote, nearly everything that happens in Olympus Has Fallen is ludicrous, yet because the fate of the president and nation hangs in the balance, the crisis is treated with the gravitas of Paul Scofield at the West End. Sheesh, and some people argue I'm too hard on movies. But reviews aren't the end of the world. How did the movie perform at the box office? The premiere for Olympus Has Fallen was held on March 18th at the ArcLight Cinema in Hollywood, California, just 3 days before the film's traditional release. Initial tracking was not off to a great start. According to the LA Times, audience tracking surveys suggest that Olympus Has Fallen, made by Millennium Films for about $70 million, could generate only so-so opening business of about $20 million, although some estimates have the film performing better. Olympus Has Fallen was finally unraveled on March 20th, 2013. In its opening weekend, the movie placed second behind the family animated film The Croods, with a strong $30 million. The marketing, which initially took its time getting off the ground, had paid off handsomely for Millennium, for Film District, and for Gerard Butler, who was in desperate need of a hit then. Olympus Has Fallen wind up with a final gross of over $107 million worldwide. That might not seem like a lot, but considering the budget of $70 million and initial low industry expectations, the movie overperformed by most metrics. In comparison to Film District's more last-minute marketing, Sony went right ahead and started promoting White House Down. At one point, the picture's title was changed to Roland Emmerich's action thriller, which I can only speculate was done because the aforementioned other already released White House film was of major concern. The first images for White House Down would premiere at Entertainment Weekly on November 3rd, 2012. The magazine sold it as Tatum & Fox's White House adventure, with the emphasis being that it was a fun summer popcorn spectacle. On February 24th, following the Oscars, Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx would appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live. While they barely talked about White House Down, the interview seemed to do its job of establishing the repertoire that the two would have on screen.
Now, which one of you won the Oscar for Ray? I forget.
I worked really hard on that one.
After months of speculation and Sony waiting for fellow presidential building Gets Burnt Alive movie Olympus Has Fallen to finish its promotional tour, the teaser poster for White House Down finally arrived on March 25th, 2013, with a tagline, "It will start like any other day." The first official poster for White House Down would be seen on March 25th. It's standard and lame, but it's definitely a modern movie poster. 8 minutes of footage of White House Down in its trailer was screened on March 26th. Reception of the footage was positive. Tweets ranging from Katie Rich of Vanity Fair saying, "White House Down is going to make a $1 billion." Well, I can pronounce that as correctly as I can gajillionaire, so you're on the right track. Empire Magazine. We've just witnessed 8 minutes of White House Down. Looks like a blast. High-level action and promising chemistry between Tatum and Fox. The trailer for White House Down would premiere the following day on March 27, 2013 on Moviefone and Entertainment Tonight. It would play alongside G.I. Joe Retaliation in theaters. The initial teaser trailer was actually quite intriguing. It starts out with Sony logo getting distorted as we cut to a broadcasted image of the White House on fire, falling piece by piece, with people running scared for their lives. The trailer is slowed down, playing like a serious life-threatening race against the clock thriller, complete with a quote from Abraham Lincoln that has been commonly considered misattributed. America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. The trailer and marketing built itself around from Roland Emmerich, director of Independence Day, The Day After Tomorrow, and 2012. When they released this trailer overseas, they axed both the incorrect Lincoln quote and the tagline, because, unsurprisingly, America's democracy, particularly as it's presented here, doesn't really fly that well overseas. The trailer is perfect at selling what the movie appeared to be on the surface. White House Down was being positioned as Sony's big summer blockbuster. The marketing was going to be in full force. The official website for the film would launch on March 29th. The website had a story section, bios, gallery, video footage, and the ability to download clips. There would also be mini-games, like Enter the Secret Service, which sees you being tasked with identifying the film's antagonists. I don't know, folks. JavaScript 2013. Kinda a little outdated in my opinion. Joey King would appear in short character videos as political YouTuber Emily Kale, which reminds one when character promotional videos were actually a thing. These videos are nothing special, sorry. They barely run a minute in length, they have incomplete episode numbers, and they always end on a freeze. Yeah, let's just say there was not much thought put into these from the big brasses. They were very mid-2010s, when movie studios were still trying to figure out YouTube. However, they're vaguely interesting to watch, within the larger context of the film's universe. Channing Tatum even shows up in one video just to drive home the connective tissue idea further. Also, I gotta respect how much Joey King is committed to playing the part of Emily.
Today, I'd like to tackle one of the most intriguing elements of the U.S. government, the Secret Service.
Hey, what you doing?
Hello, John.
What? You just gonna keep with the John thing? Is that what you're gonna do? You talking to boys on here?
The second trailer for White House Down would be released on May 2nd. The second trailer's tone was an interesting experiment in how much editing can make a movie look different. Instead of the high-stakes action of the first, we retreated to more of a lighthearted beat the bad guys romp. The music was altered, going from a generic dread score to one with more generic action beats. While I was curious Sony knew what they were doing, playing up on the summer blockbuster aspect more, this seemed rather strange on the surface. Did they actually know how to sell the film, or was there visible worry and panic inside Sony headquarters? With less than a month left to go, Sony started to ramp up the marketing for White House Down. They released another trailer on June 9th, which was really just an extension of the second. Tatum and Fox appeared on Jimmy Kimmel again, where Fox performed the musical number I Want a Chanting All Over Your Tatum. The performance went viral and got over 4 million views, leading to a music video that to date has 30 million views. Fox and Tatum would also appear on Univision to target the ever-important Latino audience, while they did a promotional parody on MTV titled Safe House, which would see Kale and President Sawyer encounter the cast of the channel's programs.
Keep it down. My pectoral muscles, these need absolute silence.
Mark Long, Road Rules, the first season? Man, you've been here for like 20 years.
Nah, they actually let me out once in a while to compete in challenges, you know, buy bandanas.
Oh, that's cool.
Guys, I didn't make this. Don't at me. Sony would arrange for 600 screenings nationwide in total before the film's release. One of these would be held in Washington, D.C. on June 21st, with the general premiere being at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York on June 25th, 2013. According to Jamie Foxx, President Obama loved the film and Fox's performance. Reviews for White House Down were for the most part mixed. While many critics seemed to prefer its lighthearted tone to Olympus Has Fallen's somber approach, they were still not exactly enamored by the film. Mick LaSalle at the San Francisco Chronicle wrote, "There may be better examples of cinematic art in 2013, but for a good time at the movies, it's hard to imagine anything beating its action extravaganza from director Roland Emmerich about a very Obama-like president." Lou Lemonick of the New York Post said, "You couldn't ask for a more fun summer popcorn movie than White House Down." But the film was of course not without its detractors. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone said White House Down, rated PG-13, but as crass and cynical as a Michael Bay movie is a depressing experience. A manufactured hit that plays to the basest instincts of its audience. The poster for this movie should read, "Hello, suckers." Joe Morgenstern of the Wall Street Journal said of White House Down, Mr. Emmerich, who is often conjured with cosmic themes, sometimes wittily, achieved something new this time around. A level of indifference to the genre and its fans that amounts to a cosmic shrug. While Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film maybe its most damning review, White House Down is a cartoonish, offensive, overblown, clanging, steaming piece of cinema. Reviews for the film were not so unsurprisingly not spectacular. What of the box office though? How did the feature perform? Well, in the words of Pete Campbell,
Not great, Bob.
initially, White House Down was expected to open as high as $50 million, but as the film was set for general release, that number had gone down to $35 million and was getting worse by the minute. On June 16th, the LA Times wrote, "This is the End may hold up well next weekend, but it will face competition from a new comedy. That's when The Heat, the buddy cop flick starring Melissa McCarthy and Sandra Bullock, hits theaters, and the movie is already on pace to open stronger than the big budget action film White House Down." White House Down hit theaters on June 27, 2013. In its opening weekend, the movie landed in 4th place behind Monsters University, The Heat, the other new release that weekend, and World War Z, grossing $24 million. In total, White House Down would gross $205 million worldwide, which technically means it made more than Olympus Has Fallen. But here's the catch. White House Down cost between $100 and $150 million, Olympus $70 million. Studios get more profit from the American box office. White House Down made $73 million domestic, Olympus Has Fallen $98 million. You see where we're going with this? Not only was White House considerably more of a failure than Olympus, but it was one of the biggest bombs of the year, and was set to lose Sony a hefty chunk of change. A Sony executive talking about the White House Down opening weekend box office situation said, "It would have been all fine if we didn't come out 2 months after Olympus Has Fallen. Their gross plus ours would have been a big hit." In an interview with GQ later that year, Emmerich blamed the movie's failure on both bad timing and the marketing team's decision to deliberately downplay the film's more shocking, explosive moments. In actuality, there were probably a lot of contributing factors to why White House Down disintegrated at the box office. Olympus didn't help, yes, but one has to consider that White House was rated PG-13, full of humor, and was largely bloodless. Olympus was R, took itself seriously, and was quite violent. They are the same film in conception, but in a lot of ways, they were trying to go for completely different audiences. Olympus Has Fallen was a clear victor in terms of financial success. However, there's one other category we have to get to. My thoughts on the two films, as actual narrative features. Which one do I prefer more? Well, Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down were released over a decade ago. If that blows your mind, consider that a lot of our understanding of the president has changed so much in the intervening years. The two movies are a vaguely interesting intersection into tone, budget, and politics, or lack thereof. Olympus is intentionally calling back the 80s action movie tropes, problematic warts and all. Yeah, this movie has a "do you speak English" gag, already pretty old by 2013. It features a serious video game rescue ops type scenario where Gerard Butler's one-man army goes from room to room, plotting down villains in the process. The action in the film is meant to be visceral. Banning performs gruesome gun-to-gun and hand-to-hand type combat to his enemies. Unfortunately, a lot of it is often obscured by darkness, as if the filmmakers are trying to hide CGI imperfections, but the intended high stakes are still there on the screen. The climactic fight Rickyun's Kane Yusak is a particular highlight. The two men deliver fatal blows to each other as Kane gives Banning the challenge of his lifetime. White House Down, in contrast, is conceived to be more in the style of a modern blockbuster. The budget is bigger, the set pieces are louder, the action is faster, sometimes to a dizzying degree, and it's intentionally more humorous. Combine that with Emmerich's use of wide-angle lenses and trademark out-of-control explosions, and it has a massive scope that Olympus simply lacks. In that way, this comparison calls back to my previous Versus video, Deep Impact and Armageddon, except this is like Deep Impact vs. Armageddon, but on steroids. Olympus stars Gerard Butler as Mike Banning. Butler's performance is Arnold-esque, and the way he delivers his lines intimidating and threatening. Calling back to roles like Clint Eastwood in the Line of Fire, he plays Banning as a no-nonsense, broken soldier who's been around the block one too many times. The movie treating him like he's the bravest man in the room. He spends a lot of his screen time sulking and doing a woe is me routine, as if the film doesn't already have enough in the way of middle-aged men in emotional turmoil. He's quick to shut down his supervisors for questioning his legitimacy. The scene between him and Robert Forster's General Eric Clegg feels hastily conceived. The antagonistic relationship between the two men should have been played up more, but it makes one point very clear. Banning's awesome, and he knows he's awesome. Banning has an undying loyalty to his country and to President Benjamin Asher. Banning's relationship with Asher's son Connor is one of the film's few real successful attempts at emotional resonance. His relationship with his wife Leah, on the other hand, is predictably throwaway, suffering from a case of what I would like to describe as we need some kind of vague romance and we need ASAP. That they keep cutting back to her just to remind you that, oh, Banning has a life outside of being a cool former Secret Service agent is perplexing. Something I think a lot of writers forget is that Holly McClane in Die Hard actually plays an important part in the plot. She's not merely the wife. If you have a wife character and you don't do anything with them, then well, they really shouldn't exist. One of the reasons Butler is one of my favorite action heroes working today is because he rarely, if ever, has a single unironic bone in his body. He takes his acting job as an action star very straightforward. Channing Tatum's turn is a complete opposite. Cale is a physique made from the gods, but in that great Channing Tatum way, he's basically a cool-looking C-grade imbecile. He's been reduced to working the White House grounds, with Richard Jenkins, Speaker of the House Rafelson, where he spends his time arguing with a squirrel. If this scene doesn't tell you to not take this movie that seriously, then hey, nothing probably will. His relationship with his politically savvy daughter Joey King's Emily fits the pat and predictable manner of dad's gotta learn to be a better father because he missed a talent show trope. It's cliche, but it does give Cale motivation that he otherwise might be lacking. Emily hosts a YouTube channel where she talks all about the president. She's gaga for the White House in a way I can't imagine most kids in 2013 or now would be. She knows everything there is to know about the history of the Oval Office, right down the secret underground tunnels where JFK allegedly had an affair with Marilyn Monroe. Cale and President Sawyer come together because of Cale's connection with Emily. Cale wants to impress his daughter. Sawyer is touched by her admiration. Through classic movie plot circumstances, they form an unlikely buddy duo as they try to make out alive. Cale gets the job he always wanted, and Sawyer now has the perfect bodyguard. Happy endings for everyone, well, unless you're a villain. Olympus Has Fallen tries its best to be about as apolitical as possible. President Asher can be read as being a Republican, but the movie clearly has its sights set on anything but that aspect. Instead, it cuts away before any of the big spiels or negotiations can happen, the siege on the Capitol having already begun. President Asher spends the majority of his screen time tied up and threatened. Because of this, there is no need for character development. All I really know about him is that he's honorable, willing to give up important codes to ensure the safety of his staff. Big surprise there. He likes to box and has become far more reticent since the death of the First Lady. Poor Ashley Judd is not even in this film as a character, but as a plot device. The most that the feature ever gets radical in its politics is Dylan McDermott's ad-lib speech about globalization. This speech, coming from the mouth of one of the antagonists, sounds bizarrely pro-capitalistic and anti-socialist. The fact that the movie tries to do a false I lost my way routine with a character does not help its case. Maybe it should have just been cut out altogether. White House Down, however, in comparison, might as well be on its feet and knees, begging the audience to be interested in the machinations of the American government system. It's almost like James Vanderbilt wrote this film in large part because he wanted to show off his political knowledge. The movie makes it loud and clear which side the characters are supposed to be on. President Sawyer's controversial withdrawal of Afghanistan mirrors that of Obama's then-own promise that if elected, he would get the troops out of Iraq. Sawyer is presented as an honorable man. He believes in the good of his country. Washington, Lincoln, and Jefferson are the men that he admires the most.
Lincoln, Washington, the not Jefferson guy.
Yada yada yada. It's bog standard pre-Trump optimism, and it makes me admittedly a bit teary-eyed just having to overthink it all. But Sawyer is also a pragmatist. When Cale's daughter Emily is threatened, he lets her go, because to him the lives of the many outweigh the needs of the few. In his own words, politics stands in the way of doing what's right. Ultimately, one's own preference for either of these films. comes down to what you want out of your action picture. The plots are fairly hackneyed, the characters are not the most well developed, there's a lot of blatant green screening going on in both, and the movies are both patriotic to an almost absurd degree, though the ways in which they are jingoistic hysterically contrast with the massive leveling of the White House happening on screen. If I had to choose between the two, I would go with White House Down. Really, it's just more my style. The villains in Olympus are North Koreans. The villains in White House Down are full-blooded Americans. Both movies are quick to establish their threats, but despite the earlier being an unaffiliated branch of a threatening empire, I find the Americans to be scarier. They basically fit the category of potential January 6ers, absolute freaks and losers. They are led by Jason Clarke's Emil Stentz, who, despite having a potentially winning backstory of revenge, is not particularly subtle about his awfulness. You can tell Clarke is having an exuberant time in the role. Kevin Reagan's Carl Killick, a sociopath who's so vile he breaks valuable antique properties, and Jimmy Simpson's Skip Tyler, a hacker. The villains in Olympus are taken out by Banning's two hands. The villains in White House Down are taken out by Kale, but he's also aided by what one might describe as fair comeuppance. I suppose there's a way in which this could be read as cutesy lazy screenwriting 101, but this is a movie that seems to thrive on setup and payoff. Something will be established earlier and then come back later. It's a Roland Emmerich specialty, though it could also be considered a James Vanderbilt favorite.
Whatever happened to the pen? It's mightier than the sword.
I choose the pen!
Both of the villains' leaders, Rick Yoon's Kane Yusak and James Woods' Martin Walker, have sympathetic backstories, but only Walker's becomes the driving force of his plot. Playing in movies Afghanistan, war-driven scenario, he wants revenge for the death of his son and is revealed to be dying of cancer. Although, even the movie seems incapable of presenting him as anything more than being unable to see the forest for the trees. The fact that he's played by James Woods, well, that's just a cherry on the sundae top. Walker and his team are revealed to have been assisted by Richard Jenkins, Speaker of the House Rafelson, which, if you were paying close attention, had already been hinted at. Still, I have to question somebody who's willing to become president for a couple of hours just before World War III starts. Olympus' plot of over-the-top American suffering destruction is pretty ridiculous too. It just comes with the territory. Rick Yoon's Kane Yusak, however, being a mega-terrorist, is the definition of pure evil. There's no attempted reasoning here, no violin on screen telling us to feel sorry for his actions, nothing to suggest that if he wasn't a total megalomaniac, he could be pretty likable. Instead, Yoon is directed by Antoine Fuqua to portray Yusanek as over-the-top and threatening as possible. Every line that comes out of his mouth sounds like some sort of death initiative. The movie's attempt at what it perceives to be epic dialogue. It makes sense for Olympus to have a villain who's, well, just a villain. Yes, Olympus works okay as an action picture, but because it takes itself too sincere and serious, it feels like it's crumbling under the weight of its own self-absurdity. Due to this, there's not much enjoyment to be had outside of the set pieces. It doesn't help that the movie uses violence as a bludgeoning tool, which I get where they're going, but I mean, I can only take Melissa Leo being a little cringe punching bag for so long. It gets tiring pretty fast.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America!
Although one category where Olympus probably beats White House Down in a positive way is well-delivered exposition dumps. If you're going to have someone explain everything, you could do worse than Morgan Freeman. In comparison, White House Down feels like a breeze. The dialogue can seem self-aware and grating at points, but the chemistry between the two leads more than makes up for it. Plus, there's so many little moments that make me giggle. Jamie Foxx wears Malcolm X glasses when they get in the Beast. He takes out a villain with an Air Jordan commercial. Tatum kills James Woods with a chain gun, and a finale that heavily reminds me of The Rock. Joey King does a flag-waving performance at the end for really kind of no reason. It could stand to shave off a good 20 minutes, but that's part and parcel for a modern Roland Emmerich movie. Olympus may have been successful enough to spawn a franchise, which gets vaguely more interesting as it goes along, but in the case of Man on a Mission versus Buddy Duo, I'm a Buddy Duo all day and all night. Hey guys, doing some research for this video, I learned about the Olympus Has Fallen court case, where John S. Green sued Creighton Rothenberger for co-ownership of the script. The fact that this was settled with Rothenberger retaining the rights basically means I took it as having nothing to do with the story of the film's creation. Since it happened though, I'd be remiss not to mention it. Anyway, bye.
Mom taught me chemistry and science and stuff. We once made a volcano and we watched it erupt. Thanks, Mom. I wanna Channing all over your potato.
Whoa. You nasty, man. You can't chant it all over your mom.
That's your mom, bro.